it's easy to tune out a little bit. We think we know the words, we think we know basically what there is to know about it. So not only is it a challenge sometimes to listen to those old familiar passages and to hear them as though we're hearing them anew, but it's also sometimes a bit of a challenge to present good news about those passages in a way that people can hear. So one of the ways that, as I'm preparing a message or a homily on a passage that is kind of an old standby like this, is that I like to look for alternate translations. And so one of the resources that I'm using as the Bible group studies the Gospel of Matthew, and as Matthew is the lectionary gospel for this year, there is a book called Provoking the Gospel of Matthew by Richard Swanson. And in his discussion of this passage, he offers an alternative translation, which I'm going to read for you. Godlike in their happiness are the poor in breath, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Godlike in their happiness are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Godlike in their happiness are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Godlike in their happiness are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Godlike in their happiness are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Godlike in their happiness are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Godlike in their happiness are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Godlike in their happiness are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Godlike in their happiness are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So we hear that word blessed in the more traditional readings of that passage, but this alternate translation that Richard Swanson is offering offers the phrase "godlike in their happiness" in place of that term "blessed are those," and that's important to note. Also, one other detail you may have noticed is that in that first line, "Godlike in their happiness are the poor in breath." It's typically poor in spirit, but this is one of those translational issues that kind of straddles the line between the Hebrew of the Old Testament and the Greek of the New Testament, because the word for spirit in Hebrew translates also to breath. That's not necessarily true of the Greek of the New Testament, where this passage is derived from. But I think it's an interesting interpretation of that line. Instead of the poor in spirit, the poor in breath, someone that is kind of exasperated, right? Blessed, godlike in their happiness are the exasperated. I think it's an interesting take on that. But this alternative translation of the Beatitudes reads a lot differently than the old familiar translations, obviously. And it causes us to seek solace. It's not so much something that comes from outside as it's something that is revealed to us from within. In other words, that soulness is not a blessing that we're asking for, but it's a blessedness. It's a godlike happiness that's already within us. In other words, as disciples of Christ, we're invited to set aside the expectations and the demands of the world that often clutter up our ability to comprehend that still, small voice of God that is within us and is constantly and faithfully calling us to an internal state of peace and of equilibrium. We're often separated from that peace of God, that peace and that equilibrium, from anxiety and from fear, and maybe even a little bit of complacency. All of those things stand to separate us from that still small voice of God. And so when we seek out that God-like happiness that we know is already within us, we're getting back in touch with that. We're breaking down the separations. Christian author consolation in times of distress and challenge, and even in times of grief. Those are the things that bring us to seeking out this godlike happiness within us. The path of Christian discipleship, Jesus is telling us, is full of difficulty. It is full of difficulty. Maybe no less so for us than it has been for the prophets who foretold the coming of Christ. But we can discover the peace of Christ within us as we faithfully persevere through fading health and grief and the inability to assert ourselves. All of those things are things that Jesus points out in the Beatitudes and says that they are actually sources. There are ways for us to find that godlike happiness within us. But Jesus doesn't simply stop at binding up our spiritual wounds by revealing this godlike happiness. He is inviting us to recall the words of the prophet Micah, which remind us that God requires us to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God by being merciful, by being pure at heart, by being peacemakers, and by sustaining all of these Christ-like qualities through the inevitable resistance that we encounter from those who consider the gospel of Christ and the search for God's kingdom to be complete foolishness. Paul points that out, that to the world, the gospel is foolishness. We will constantly run up against that as people of faith. But we can persevere through that, through being merciful, through being pure at heart, through being peacemakers, as we're called to by the prophet Micah. This wisdom that Jesus is imparting here, the wisdom that he's imparting is that by doing the works of righteousness, which, as I pointed out in a previous message, when we hear righteousness in Scripture, what we're talking about is right relationship with one another, and right relationship with creation, not a permission to consider yourself better than others. The righteousness that's spoken of in Scripture is about right relationship. So what Jesus is